Hi, everybody, and welcome to A Case of the Jills. It is a huge honor and privilege today to have Dr. Sarah Berga with us today. She is the professor and chair of obstetrics and gynecology at the Jacobs School of Medicine at the University of Buffalo. And you can see, I think behind her, you can see a little bit of frost on the trees back there, I think. She has her bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia, medical degree from University of Virginia School of Medicine. She did her residency at Harvard. She did fellowship at University of California at San Diego. She specializes in reproductive hormones, infertility, and stress-induced hypothalamic hypogonadism, which, as we know in this community, is HA or FHA. Her research interests include determining the neuroendocrine mechanisms mediating stress-induced reproductive compromise and the impact of sex hormones on brain health. And she pretty much is our patron saint in this channel. And I have referenced her work so often that I sent out a Hail Mary pass to her assistant and said, would she agree to talk to us? And she gratefully agreed to. So Dr. Berga, thank you so much for being with us today.
Nice to be here, Jill. Thank you for introducing me to the community.
Yes, we are fans. We have seen quotes from your work all on my Instagram this last bit and referenced in a few of the videos. So your name will not be new to them. So it is impossible to know where to start because of how much work you have out there and how much research. But just to get people started, I thought maybe we could talk about sort of how you kind of got started looking at this area of research and sort of just the initial kind of spark of inspiration in this area.
You know, I don't know that anything ever has much of a beginning. Certainly, I hope it doesn't have much of an end. But I think what happens is that there are these periods of what I would say scientific discovery that allow you to look a little bit closer at something. So I think the association between exercise, under eating, and lifestyle factors and amenorrhea or infertility was always hypothesized, you know, by ancient time to now. And then I just was standing in the right place at the right time when we discovered all of the neurohormones that actually communicate behavior to the body. So that's what was going on at UCSD and nearby institutes of advanced science like Salk, where they were discovering GnRH and CRH, and they were literally translating how the body spoke to itself and discovering the hormonal patterns. And I just, you know, I went there on purpose, of course, but I mean, I just happened to get there at a highly fortuitous time. And from I would say from a sort of societal view, it was also a time when people were very excited about learning this. Like, you know, there was just this huge embrace and enthusiasm about what we might learn. So, you know, we had these opportunities. And at the same time, I was seeing women who didn't have periods, who didn't know why. And so on one hand was this great scientific discoveries that I wasn't personally responsible to, you know, actually develop that could harness. And then the other hand were these patients who really were mystified about why they didn't have their periods. And so we were able to synthesize all that and ask some questions like, if I stop doing X, will something else happen? You know, kind of simple-minded questions. And then try to understand what that meant. So it was really exciting because even though the relationship between behavior and reproductive function was known, the specifics were not. And without knowing the specifics, it's hard to actually give good advice.
Right. That's yeah, that seems like a very exciting time to be there. It's interesting that you mentioned about some of the perhaps a balance we would have to make between deciding different things to do and what sort of effect that would have on the body. And I think that's a lot about what we talk about on this channel. in one of the articles that you've written, you mentioned that on the list of things that affect cycles are, and you talk about something that we know very well on this channel, which is body composition, energy balance, metabolism, stress and emotional states, cognitive assessments, and it's so clear. And it seems that this is something that if it's not even interesting to you anymore. You've read it so many times, you know it so well. Yet here it is, we stop when we read, okay, we understand the body composition part, but when we read stress and emotional states, and then we read cognitive assessments, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because we don't like to think about that part.
Well, some people do like to think about that part, and some people don't. Actually, I've found that there are people who have hypothalamic amenorrhea who are fine thinking about how they got to where they are, but they might need some encouragement, or they might need a kindly ear, or I think part of what people can think about has to do with the milieu in which they find themselves. So in certain cultures, none of this can really be addressed adequately. And in other cultures, there's more opportunity. And then within one country, say the United States, there's like lots of microcultures, right? So some of what people can articulate has to do with the environment they find themselves in. And it's not always easy to find someone who will listen. If you're a physician, you're going to have some of both kinds in your practice. And when people come, I think part of what we have not really enshrined so well in medicine is the listening art. So in my opinion, just from listening to what people have to say, a lot of the stuff is going on in there. A lot of it is pretty well articulated to the person, but they need to hear themselves say it in order to process it. So that is actually how I came to it, because it was obvious that by talking to someone who is interested in the person's well-being, that they felt better. And it wasn't like some, grand thing. You can't put neon around that. But artful and caring listening was clearly beneficial.
Right.
And then I thought, wonder what this is really leading to. Like, can we show that being a good physician who listens carefully will have any kind of material benefit to the person that you're listening to? That's where it started.
It's amazing that you say that, because, for example, I think a lot of the people in this community have an experience of going to a gynecologist, not getting their period, and the idea of a psychogenic stress being a precipitator of, or is something that causes you to lose your period. It doesn't seem that people are having the experience that talking about their stresses is being sort of picked up by the physician and understood to mean that this person is under a great deal of stress from different areas in their lives, which is incurring a debt somewhere in their hypothalamus where their body is unable to produce enough sex hormone. People seem to have an okay time getting, hormone tested and kind of having that mechanical conversation with physicians. But when it comes to expressing more about their mental health, perhaps, or even perhaps, we've talked on this channel about things like cognitive dietary restraint, where we're very concerned about what we're eating. We're very concerned about our body size, et cetera. It doesn't seem like that information is sinking in a physician visit. And why would you say that there's such a disconnect still in that?
It's actually a little hard to understand exactly, but I think maybe we can own some of that at the medical level from not educating people. But it may be just the framework for medicine and how we think about it. Yeah, so I think we need to teach how the body works, and what we sometimes call whole physiology, because we've actually in some ways teach it in a fragmented way, right? Like we teach how the ovary works, but we don't necessarily teach all of the mechanisms by which the signaling goes to the ovary. We don't understand how cortisol actually interferes with other hormonal signals. We don't understand how glucose dependent the brain is. And that is actually all just because we don't often teach much about whole physiology. And then we actually do slice things into different specialties and subspecialties, which isn't necessarily wrong, but then we don't always reassemble it. So, you know, I mean, that is a cognitive art unto itself, right? To first look at something very deeply and then synthesize it. So that is the goal of medicine, right? Is to put it all back together. But sometimes we don't give ourselves very easy ways to do that. So if you're a person with hypothalamic amenorrhea and you're not really sure how you got to that place, you don't know all of the little behaviors that led to it. And a lot of times they are little, you know, like they're not that obvious. Then you don't even know what it is that you should do or undo. So some of it is, I would say, in the category of undo. You know, you do things and now you need to stop doing them, or you do things that may be needing to be moderated, you know, like they're not wrong to do. For instance, like everybody needs to eat, but what you eat and how you eat and when you eat is requiring moderation forever, right? When that gets out of balance in either direction, we have issues that ensue that affect your whole physiology. If you're an osteoporosis expert, you might be seeing the bone manifestations of hypothalamic amenorrhea, but you may not know that much about how the person got to that place behaviorally. You can just see that there's a signature at the level of the bone. So teaching people that one manifestation of this disorder actually has to be tied back into the whole picture of this imbalance, I think is really what we don't do such a good job of. Right. That's just my personal point of view, having been in this profession a really long time. Right. That makes sense?
Yeah, it really does. It's interesting too, because what you've said, and you've actually done research on sort of the sort of synergistic aspect of stress, that it's not just one thing. So thereby it cannot just be one aspect of medicine that is picking up on one thing, because there could be multiple layers systemically that are being affected by various types of stress that, you know, taken all together, added up in concert, become this disorder where we are not getting a period. When you did that research and when you talked about the synergistic sort of effect there, how small are we talking in terms of like various layers? Like what kinds of things were working together that maybe people might recognize in their lives that tended to, again, taken all together in aggregate, became troublesome?
Well, you know, I think we've always kind of had this concept out there of what I would say state dependence. So when you do something and you're hypocaloric, it has one set of effects. When you do something and you're not hypocaloric, but you're eucaloric, it might have a different set of effects. So for instance, you know, one of our studies, we put people on exercise bicycles, and, you know, we didn't have them have any instructions about to eat or not to eat, except to not eat 3 hours before, you know. So they arrive in their not recently fed state, but we didn't tell them what to do for, you know, the 9 years before that, or even the day before that. So all we know is half have amenorrhea and half are having regular cycles. And we've shown that they're ovulatory by measuring their progesterone levels. And it's in the daytime. So they're supposed to be at a time when their cortisol levels are the lowest. And we want to see what happens when they exercise. So first of all, their cortisol levels are not the same, even at the lowest part of the day in that particular study. And when they exercise, the ones that have the high cortisols actually drop their glucose, even though they start with the same glucose levels in their circulation as everyone else. And that actually even surprised me, even though I kind of knew all this. I was like, wow. And then trying to articulate that to patients, to scientists, to doctors is hard, because this whole idea is it's not exercise per se, right? It's exercise in the background of, and fill in the blank. Right. So the exercise doesn't have a uniform set of effects. And that's just how we live every day. You know, the impact of a behavior will be determined by what is going on with us right before we engage in that behavior, what state we are in.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It truly does. I'm so glad that you said that, because I think a lot of times people think to themselves, well, you know, is exercise bad? And it's like, well, you know, you try to explain to people that nothing in a vacuum is bad. It's that you're not just exercising, you're also exercising. You know, you haven't eaten properly today, you didn't sleep well last night, you have an exam, you got in a fight with your boyfriend, and also, you know, and then it's like, oh, by the way, the pandemic, let's throw that in. So I think that is, yeah, it's really gets to this whole concept of the what people don't really understand is how much cortisol affects and where cortisol can kind of grow from. I think it's important for people to hear you say that nothing's in a vacuum. It's everything sort of taken all together. That's shocking.
Well, and even the reason someone is doing something really matters. Yeah. So if, you know, if they exercise because they just feel like they want to get out of the house, and, you know, it is the pandemic and the air outside is clean and there's not a lot of people around, you know, that's one kind of, I would say, you know, way of kind of de-stressing. But if you don't feel like exercising, but you put yourself on a regimen and now you must get out, and even though it's dangerous outside right now and it's snowing and, you know, it's ugly and you're likely to get hit by a car, but you do it anyway because you put yourself on a routine, then, you know, you go out and you're in this alarmed state before you even go out.
Right.
And so it is not really going to be the same bout of exercise because it's for different reasons. You're thinking different things at the time.
Right.
And so one thing I like to say is exercise is great if it's for the right reasons. And if it's to solve psychological problems, it's probably not very good because it's not what it does. It's not a form of solving psychological problems. And it is maybe a release. It can be a running away from. It can be a substitute for, but it's not probably a cognitive solution to a lot of things. Because I think, honestly, when you're running, you can think, but you're not like thinking in the same way. Or if you're skiing, let's just say that that's one of the things you like to do. You know, I think most people ski not to solve their cognitive problems, because that wouldn't be what you would suggest right off the bat. And yeah. So I think sometimes people do adapt to the environment by ignoring it, right? Just pretending it's not there. And then some people really need to embrace the environment to understand its impact. You know, a lot of times you have to balance those two things. You can't think about everything all day long. But if you never think about anything, or you think very rarely about how things work in your own life, then that lack of reflection may catch up with you. And so why you're doing something is as important as what you do. And I think that that's another important sort of holy grail of this, is to create that mindfulness.
Which segues wonderfully into my next question, or sort of you wrote that 75% of women who have FHA are helped by not, you know, all these crazy things that people want to think of, but cognitive behavioral therapy. And, you know, again, this is probably something that you've seen in your own work so often that it fails to have an impact, but For people in our community, we are used to going about it in a mechanical way. People want to know products, they want to know pharmaceuticals, they want to know numbers of things that will get them healthy. And what I really love about your research and your message is that the thing that's going to help you is exactly what you said, this tuning into yourself, this mindfulness about your habits and behaviors, and this need to understand not just where you are today, but how you got here. Can you talk more about your experience with CBT and how you've seen that play out therapeutically?
Yeah, well, I mean, just to say, even people who do CBT weren't necessarily convinced that doing CBT would have any kind of impact on reproductive function. And so I think its initial reception was this is heretical. And so that people don't necessarily buy it the first time has been my experience. Like they don't like, what? That the way you think, the way you process information is going to impact your hormone levels. That's a surprise to many people, even people who are actually engaging in teaching others cognitive behavior therapy or, applying it in some kind of clinical context. But so the kind of the fun part for me was to say, if cognitive behavior therapy impacted hormones, could it be harnessed to help people whose hormones are not quite in balance? And so that was sort of a big question. Not that I ever knew the answer. I started just thinking, oh, well, let's see, right? I didn't know before I did it if it was going to work. But it seemed like low-lying fruit in the sense of cognitive behavior therapy is maybe some mental homework that we should all do every day. So why not start with something that isn't a drug, that is actually just good self-care, and go with that first. And that's what we did. So that's why we didn't start with some prescriptive thing. The other thing is the core concept of cognitive behavior therapy is to meet the person where they are. So, I don't know how much any one person should really weigh. And it's probably dependent on a whole bunch of things that I can't really measure. And so eventually came to the point of view that you're not really negotiating with others. You're negotiating with yourself about what you think you should be doing, because no one else knows what you should be doing. There's this funny card in the card store that says, be yourself, everyone else is already taken. But it is sort of like that. You're supposed to, you are supposed to know yourself better than anyone else. And if you don't know yourself, then it's going to be hard for you because you are the instrument of yourself. So if your familiarity with your own cognitions is so low that you can't really harness them in an appropriate way, it's going to be harder. And so that's what I sometimes refer to as internal locus of control. So when we were thinking about how to help people restore their hormonal balance, we kind of sort of posited that it would start with restoring your sort of cognitive balance, if you will, and then that other things might follow. And so that was sort of the simple-minded idea. Okay, if you have mental health, you'll have physical health, and that these are not separate parts of the body, right? And so that whole idea that we are an integrated physiologic unit, among ourselves, all our little body pieces are speaking to each other. We have to orchestrate. And so we have to orchestrate how? We orchestrate through our cognitions and our behaviors that follow our cognitions. Right? So how are we going to orchestrate ourselves? So who's in control is cognition, if you will. So how you think about yourself, your cognitive health actually will probably have a pretty major impact. Now, it won't take care of everything, obviously. I mean, it's a way of taking care of the things that can be taken care of that way. It's not a panacea for all of life's ails. You can't get rid of being really sick with a virus by thinking it away, right? That is not an appropriate use of cognitive behavior therapy. But things that start as cognitions that are maybe not helpful can be addressed through cognitive behavior therapy. And a lot of this stuff sounds trivial, but doesn't feel trivial to the person. So, if you were to specify what someone's upset about, a lot of people aren't going to even think that's worth talking about. So it's all about valence. What is mattering to the person in front of you determines what needs to be talked about, not what you think, how many calories. I mean, you can talk about that if you want to, but we don't know each day how many calories someone needs. Depends what they do. And, to think that thought is free and doesn't have any calories associated with, it's kind of crazy too. Like if you are very cognitively engaged, more of you is thinking, right? More of your brain. And your brain is an energy guzzler. It requires more energy than any other body part. So not feeding your brain sort of leads to other consequences. Your brain gets disturbed. Sometimes it goes on high alarm. The effect of feeling stressed is to put your body into a state of higher alarm to motivate you. And some people just ignore that signal or don't feel it. It's hard to know. So raising one's own awareness is really the first step. But it's raising one's own awareness about oneself.